Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. Evil never sleeps. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Unsettling Arrival. The winter of 1820 was particularly harsh in Ashwood. The settlers huddled around the meager warmth of their fires, whispering of the strange events that had befallen their small community. One bitterly cold night, the Johnson family faced a terror unlike any other. Mary Johnson awoke to the sound of her baby crying, but as she reached the cradle, the infant was gone. A cold draft swept through the cabin, and the front door creaked open, revealing the lifeless body of her husband, his eyes wide with fear. The only clue was a single bloody handprint on the door. Ashwood was never the same after that night. Detective Sam Carter shook off the remnants of his unsettling dream as he stepped out of his car. The small town of Ashwood, nestled in rural New England, was a far cry from the bustling streets of New York City. Here, colonial-era buildings stood proudly along fog-covered streets, and dense, dark forests loomed at the edges of town, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Sam had been called in to investigate a series of unexplained deaths that had the townspeople whispering about curses and old superstitions. As he walked down Main Street, he felt the eyes of the locals on him, their wary glances a clear sign of their distrust. In Ashwood, outsiders were not just strangers, they were intruders. The town's insular nature was immediately apparent. Sam could feel the weight of generations of history pressing down on him, the air thick with an unspoken tension. The quaint charm of the colonial architecture and the cobblestone streets belied a deep-rooted fear that seemed to permeate every corner of Ashwood. His first stop was the local diner, a cozy establishment where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of homemade pies. The din of conversation hushed as Sam entered, and all eyes turned towards him. He took a seat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and waited. It wasn't long before Mr. Harlan, the town's eccentric historian, sidled up to him. Harlan was a wiry old man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. "You're the detective from the city, aren't you?" Harlan's voice was a low rasp, filled with a mix of curiosity and caution. "That's right," Sam replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "I'm here to look into the recent deaths." Harlan nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. "Ashwood is an old town, detective. It has secrets, dark secrets. You'd do well to remember that." Sam felt a chill run down his spine at the old man's words. As he left the diner, the fog seemed thicker, the shadows deeper. Ashwood was a town with a past, and Sam had the uneasy feeling that the past wasn't done with Ashwood just yet. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. The fog thickened as Sam left the diner, Mr. Harlan's cryptic words echoing in his mind. Ashwood had secrets, and it was his job to uncover them. He made his way to the town hall, where the latest victim's case file awaited him. The victim, Thomas Abernathy, was a prominent local businessman and philanthropist. His sudden and violent death had sent shockwaves through the community. Sam studied the file. Abernathy had been found in his study, his body contorted in a gruesome manner, his face frozen in a rictus of terror. There were no signs of forced entry, no clear cause of death. Deputy Sarah Collins was waiting for him in the small office. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman with a strong presence and a deep connection to the community. Her piercing gaze met his as he entered. "Detective Carter, I presume." Her voice was firm, with an edge that suggested she wasn't one to be easily impressed. "That's right," Sam replied, extending a hand. I understand you were close to Mr. Abernathy. Everyone in Ashwood knew Thomas, she said, shaking his hand briefly. He was one of the town's pillars. His death has everyone on edge. Sam nodded, looking around the office filled with photos and memorabilia of Ashwood's past. I'm here to get to the bottom of this. Any help you can provide would be appreciated. Sarah's expression softened slightly. I'll do what I can. But you should know, people around here don't take kindly to outsiders poking around. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a bell as the front door opened. A young girl, no more than 16, hesitantly stepped inside. Sarah's demeanor changed immediately, becoming protective and warm. Emily, what are you doing here? Sarah asked gently. Emily's wide eyes darted between Sarah and Sam. I had another nightmare. About Mr. Abernathy. Sam watched the girl closely. Nightmare. Emily nodded, trembling. I saw him in my dream. He was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand. It was like he was warning me. Sam's interest peaked. You've had these dreams before. Emily glanced at Sarah for reassurance before nodding. Ever since the first death. It's like I can feel them, the people who've died. Sarah put a comforting arm around Emily. Emily's been through a lot. Her parents died in a car accident last year. She's been having these dreams ever since. Sam felt a chill. This town, with its whispers of the past, was getting under his skin. He needed more information, and he knew just the person to ask. That evening, Sam found himself back at Mr. Harlan's cluttered home. The old historian seemed to be expecting him. So, you've decided to dig deeper, Harlan said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and caution. I need to know about the curse, Sam replied, leaning forward. What's really going on in this town? Harlan sighed, looking past Sam as if seeing into the past. Ashwood was built on blood and betrayal. The curse began in the colonial era with a woman named Eliza. She was wronged, and in her death, she swore vengeance. Ever since, her spirit has haunted this place, claiming the lives of those tied to the original betrayal. Sam felt the weight of Harlan's words. And Abernathy? He was connected to one of the original families, Harlan said gravely. Eliza's curse is still very much alive, and it's spreading. You're not just facing a murderer, detective. You're facing the wrath of the past. As Sam left Harlan's house, the fog seemed thicker, the night darker. Ashwood's past was clawing its way into the present, and he was caught in its deadly grip. Chapter 3: Unearthing Secrets. The fog clung to Ashwood like a shroud as Sam made his way to the local library the next morning. Mr. Harlan's words echoed in his mind. The library, a grand colonial-era building, loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding. Inside, the library was a maze of towering shelves filled with dusty books and old records. The dim lighting cast long shadows, and the air smelled of aged paper and history. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched as he navigated the narrow aisles. Sarah Collins joined him, her skepticism palpable. You really think you'll find something here? She asked, her voice tinged with doubt. I have to try, Sam replied, pulling out an old leather-bound volume. There has to be a pattern, something that ties all these deaths together. Sarah watched him for a moment before reluctantly helping. Fine, but if we find nothing, you owe me coffee. They spent hours poring over old newspaper articles, diary entries, and town records. Each piece of information painted a picture of a town plagued by strange occurrences dating back to the colonial era. There were reports of mysterious illnesses, unexplained disappearances, and bizarre deaths, all seemingly unconnected, but with an underlying thread of darkness. Sam found a particularly disturbing diary entry from 1821. It described the last days of Eliza, the woman Harlan had mentioned. She had been wronged by the town's founders and had sworn vengeance with her dying breath. Her curse, the diary suggested, was bound to an artifact and amulet passed down through the generations. Sarah, still skeptical but intrigued, glanced at the entry over Sam's shoulder. An amulet? Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. Fairy tales often have a basis in reality, Sam replied, his eyes scanning the page. And in Ashwood, reality seems to be stranger than fiction. They continued their research until Sam stumbled upon a faded newspaper clipping from the early 1900s. It detailed the mysterious death of a local man who had been found clutching an old amulet, his face frozen in terror. The same amulet was mentioned in several other incidents, each time associated with a sudden, unexplained death. "This is it," Sam said, tapping the clipping. "This amulet is the key. If we can find it, we might be able to break the curse." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she read the clipping. And how exactly do we find a centuries-old artifact that's been missing for decades? Sam stood up, determination in his eyes. "We start by looking where the last victim found it. If it's still in town, we'll find it." Their search led them to the old archives room in the library's basement. The room was dark and musty, filled with forgotten records and artifacts. As they sifted through the clutter, Sam felt a chill run down his spine. He was close. He could feel it. Sarah held up an old, dusty box, her expression one of wary curiosity. "Think this could be it?" Sam took the box from her and carefully opened it. Inside, nestled in old yellowed newspaper, was the amulet. It was a simple piece, tarnished with age, but there was something undeniably sinister about it. "This is it," Sam whispered, feeling the weight of the artifact in his hand. "This is what's been causing all the deaths." Sarah stared at the amulet, her skepticism giving way to a dawning realization. "So, what do we do now?" "We find out how to destroy it," Sam said, his voice resolute. "And we put an end to this curse once and for all." As they left the library, the fog outside seemed thicker, the shadows darker. Ashwood's secrets were coming to light, and the past was closing in on them. Sam knew they were running out of time, and the real battle was just beginning. Chapter 4: The Forest of Fear. The amulet lay heavy in Sam's pocket as he and Sarah made their way to Mr. Harlan's house. The historian had agreed to guide them to the spot in the forest where the amulet was last buried, its location passed down through generations of townsfolk. Ashwood's secrets were finally coming to light, and they were ready to face whatever darkness awaited them. Mr. Harlan met them at the edge of town, a lantern in his hand, casting eerie shadows in the thickening twilight. "The forest is no place for the faint of heart," he warned, his eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. "Stay close and keep your wits about you." The three of them ventured into the dense forest, the towering trees forming a canopy that blocked out the remaining light. The fog crept around their feet, swirling in ghostly patterns. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and every rustle seemed to carry a whisper of the past. Sam's heart pounded as they moved deeper into the woods. The forest seemed alive, watching them with unseen eyes. Shadows shifted and danced just beyond the reach of their lanterns, and faint whispers floated through the air, sending chills down his spine. Sarah walked beside him, her hand resting on the hilt of her flashlight, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Are you sure we're going the right way?" she asked, her voice a low murmur. Harlan nodded, his pace steady. "The path is here," if you know where to look. We're close." As they trudged through the undergrowth, the oppressive silence was broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in around them. Sam could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the curse's presence growing stronger with every step. Suddenly, Harlan stopped and pointed to a clearing up ahead. "There," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's where it all began." The clearing was eerily silent, the trees forming a natural barrier around it. In the center, the ground was bare, as if something had been recently unearthed. Sam's heart raced as they approached. As they reached the center of the clearing, a cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it a low, mournful wail. Sam and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances, their nerves on edge. Harlan knelt down and began to dig, his hands trembling slightly. After a few tense minutes, Harlan uncovered a small, weathered chest. The wood was rotten, and the hinges creaked as he opened it. Inside lay an old relic, an ancient medallion etched with strange symbols. "This is it," Harlan said, his voice filled with awe and fear. "The source of the curse." Sam reached down and picked up the medallion, its surface cold and slick. As he held it, he felt a surge of dark energy, a connection to the past's malevolent force. The forest seemed to come alive around them, the whispers growing louder, the shadows closing in. "We need to destroy it," Sam said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at his gut. "It's the only way to end this." Sarah nodded, her eyes steely with determination. "Let's finish this." As they turned to leave, the forest erupted in a cacophony of ghostly wails and moving shadows. Past was fighting to keep its hold on Ashwood, but Sam and Sarah were ready to face whatever came next. The battle against the curse had truly begun. Chapter 5. The Curse Unveiled. The journey back from the forest was tense, the weight of the ancient medallion pressing heavily on Sam's mind. As they returned to town, a brooding silence settled over them, the eerie stillness of the forest now echoing in the quiet streets of Ashwood. The night seemed darker, and a sense of dread hung in the air. Back at the small, dimly lit study of Mr. Harlan, they gathered around an old wooden table littered with books and maps. Harlan began recounting the tale that had shaped Ashwood's dark legacy. "Long ago, in the early 1700s," Harlan began, his voice low and somber, "there was a woman named Eliza Gray. She was wronged by the town's founders, accused of witchcraft, and betrayed by those she trusted. Her final moments were filled with rage and sorrow, and her spirit cursed the land as she died." Flashbacks flickered in Sam's mind, fragments of images from the past: Eliza's anguished face, the flames of her execution, the betrayal of her closest friends. Each vision brought with it a surge of guilt and fear, making Sam question his own past actions. He had always been a man of justice, but now he wondered if his pursuit of it had led him to this place of darkness. Sarah, who had been listening intently, noticed Sam's troubled expression. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Sam said, though his voice betrayed him. "It's just this whole thing feels like a reflection of my own past mistakes." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of his introspection. "We're all facing our demons here, but we need to focus on the task at hand." The tension in Ashwood had been palpable. Whispers followed them wherever they went, and a few had outright confronted them, accusing them of stirring up old fears. It was clear that the townspeople were either in denial about the curse or were somehow complicit in its continuation. That night, as Sam attempted to rest, the curse made its presence known in a more personal and terrifying way. He fell into a restless sleep, only to be plunged into a nightmarish vision. He found himself in a dark, desolate forest, the trees twisted and gnarled. Eliza's ghostly figure appeared, her face twisted in an expression of pure vengeance. Her eyes burned with an otherworldly fire as she reached out toward him, her voice a haunting wail. "You are not free from guilt," her voice echoed, a chilling whisper that pierced his very soul. "You are part of this curse." Sam woke with a start, his body drenched in sweat, his heart racing. The dream had felt so real, the terror so visceral. The lines between reality and nightmare were blurring, and Sam knew that the curse had found a new way to haunt him. Sarah, sensing his distress, sat beside him. "You need to face it," she said gently. "Whatever the curse is trying to tell you, we have to confront it together." As dawn broke over Ashwood, the town seemed to hold its breath. The past was clawing its way into the present, and Sam and Sarah were caught in its relentless grip. The spirit of Eliza was more powerful than they had imagined, and the fight to end her curse was far from over. Chapter 6. Descent into Madness. The chill of dawn did little to ease Sam's troubled mind. The night had brought with it a new level of torment, the lines between reality and nightmare blurring into a waking horror. His reflection in the mirror was haggard, eyes bloodshot, and face drawn. The spirit's influence seemed to seep into every corner of his world, warping it into something unrecognizable. The town of Ashwood had become a distorted reflection of itself. The once familiar streets now felt oppressive, the colonial-era buildings casting long, threatening shadows. The fog seemed thicker, swirling with dark shapes that danced at the edges of his vision. Even the comforting clink of the diner's coffee cups now sounded like the clanging of chains in a dungeon. Sarah noticed Sam's growing disorientation. "You need to pull yourself together," she said, her voice laced with concern but firm. "We have to find Emily before it's too late." Emily's disappearance had sent shockwaves through the town. The high school student had been last seen leaving her home, her whereabouts now unknown. The search efforts had turned frantic, but every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. The stakes had never felt higher. The townspeople's hostility had reached a boiling point. Accusations flew like arrows, blaming Sam and Sarah for the strange occurrences plaguing Ashwood. The small, close-knit community that had once been wary now saw them as a threat, their anger fueled by fear and superstition. Even the local authorities had turned against them, their once supportive stance now replaced by outright hostility. Sam and Sarah stood in the center of town, surrounded by a growing mob of angry residents. Shouts and accusations filled the air, their voices a cacophony of paranoia and rage. Sam tried to reason with them, but their minds were made up. "You've brought this curse upon us." One woman screamed, "We were fine before you came." As the crowd closed in, Sam felt a surge of panic. The town had become an alien landscape, every familiar landmark now twisted into a source of dread. He and Sarah retreated to the library, seeking refuge in the dimly lit space that had once been their ally. Inside, the shadows seemed to close in on them, the oppressive atmosphere making Sam feel as though he were suffocating. His mind raced with fear and guilt, the pressure of the curse's influence pushing him toward the brink of madness. In the midst of their growing despair, Sarah's phone rang. It was a frantic call from Emily's parents. "We found something," Emily's mother said, her voice breaking. "A note. It's addressed to you." Sam and Sarah read the note, which was scrawled in Emily's handwriting, but seemed to be a jumbled mix of cryptic messages. One line stood out: "I'm hiding where the past meets the present." They exchanged a grim look, knowing that finding Emily was their only hope of breaking the curse. The clock was ticking, and the darkness was closing in. The town's anger, the spirit's malevolence, and their own creeping madness all converged into a single urgent mission. They had to find Emily and end the curse before it consumed them all. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The full moon cast a spectral light over the forest as Sam, Sarah, and Mr. Harlan made their way to the clearing where the curse had begun. The air was still and cold, the fog curling around their feet like ghostly fingers. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, the forest shadows alive with menace. Sam's mind was a whirlwind of anxiety and determination. The note from Emily had been a clue, leading them to the heart of the forest, where the past and present collided. They had to face the spirit of Eliza Gray and end the curse once and for all. Mr. Harlan led the way, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the ancient trees. "The clearing is just ahead," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Eliza's spirit is strongest here. Be prepared for anything." As they entered the clearing, the moonlight revealed an eerie tableau. The ground was marked with symbols of old, and the remnants of ancient rituals lay scattered. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a palpable sense of dread hung over the place. Sarah set up a protective circle using salt and herbs, her hands steady despite the tension. Sam could feel the oppressive weight of the curse bearing down on him, the fear and guilt from his nightmares merging with the palpable malevolence of the spirit. He was about to face his deepest fears. Harlan began a low chant, reciting incantations meant to weaken the spirit's hold. The air grew colder, and the fog thickened, swirling around them in oppressive clouds. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows elongating and shifting. Suddenly, a chilling wail cut through the night. Eliza's ghostly form materialized in the center of the clearing, her face a contorted mask of rage and sorrow. Her eyes blazed with a supernatural fire, and her presence filled the clearing with an overwhelming sense of despair. "You dare to challenge me?" Eliza's voice echoed, a mournful wail that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. "You will suffer as I have suffered." Sam felt a wave of terror, his guilt and fear threatening to overwhelm him. He could see the faces of those he had wronged in his past, their accusatory gazes merging with Eliza's spectral form. The spirit's power seemed to feed off his internal turmoil. "Sam, you have to focus." Sarah's voice broke through his haze of fear. She held up a charm, its glow cutting through the darkness. "We need to weaken her." With a deep breath, Sam forced himself to confront his inner demons. He stepped forward, confronting Eliza's spirit. "I am not here to be your victim," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I am here to end this curse." Eliza's wail grew louder, and the shadows around them seemed to writhe in agony. Sam pressed forward, drawing on his own strength and the support of his friends. He raised the amulet they had found, holding it high. The amulet began to glow with a fierce light, its power countering the spirit's malevolence. Eliza's form flickered and twisted, her rage giving way to desperation. The spirit seemed to be drawn to the light, her form growing weaker with every moment. "Let go of your anger," Sam shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Release the curse and find peace." Eliza's spirit let out one final, mournful cry before dissipating into the fog, her form dissolving into the night. The oppressive weight in the clearing lifted, the fog slowly beginning to clear. Sam, Sarah, and Mr. Harlan stood in the clearing, exhausted but victorious. The curse was broken, and the darkness that had plagued Ashwood was finally at an end. The forest, once a place of terror, now seemed peaceful, bathed in the soft light of the dawn. As they made their way back to town, The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees. The battle was over, but the scars of their ordeal would remain. Sam and Sarah had faced their fears and conquered the darkness, bringing a sense of closure to a town haunted by its past. Chapter 8. The Aftermath. First light of dawn seeped through the trees, casting a gentle glow over the forest clearing. The oppressive fog that had shrouded Ashwood in darkness for so long was slowly lifting, revealing a town bathed in the soft hues of morning. The curse had been broken, and the spirit of Eliza Gray had finally been laid to rest. Sam, Sarah, and Mr. Harlan emerged from the forest, their faces etched with exhaustion, but also relief. The battle had taken a toll, but there was a palpable sense of victory in the air. Ashwood, once a place of fear and suspicion, was beginning to shed its haunted past. The town looked different in the daylight. Its colonial-era architecture now seemed less menacing, and the streets were bathed in the warm light of morning. The residents, who'd once been consumed by fear and anger, now went about their daily routines with a cautious optimism. The air felt lighter, the weight of the curse finally lifted from their shoulders. Sam found himself walking through the town square, taking in the changes. The faces of the townspeople, once hostile and wary, now offered nods of acknowledgement and gratitude. He could feel a sense of redemption settling over him, the guilt of his past actions slowly dissolving with each step he took. He had faced his personal demons and emerged stronger, finding a semblance of closure he had long sought. Sarah joined him, her expression reflecting a mix of satisfaction and lingering unease. "It's hard to believe it's really over," she said, her voice tinged with a sense of quiet relief. "It is," Sam replied, his gaze fixed on the town. "But we both know that peace is often fleeting." As they walked, Sam noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The town's newfound peace was palpable, but there were still traces of the old tension lingering. The fog that had dissipated seemed to be rolling back in, curling around the edges of the town like a hesitant specter. Mr. Harlan, who had been observing quietly, spoke up. "The curse is broken, but remember, evil never truly sleeps. The past has a way of creeping back when you least expect it." Sam nodded, understanding the truth in Harlan's words. The town had been freed from one darkness, but shadows of the past had a way of returning, often in unexpected ways. As they approached the edge of town, Sam glanced back one last time. The fog had settled back over Ashwood, a ghostly reminder that while the curse had been lifted, the town's history and its echoes would remain. The struggle had ended, but the threat of evil lingered like a shadow on the edge of their world. The novel closed on this haunting image, a subtle reminder that peace was not always permanent, and that the darkness of the past could return when least expected. As Sam and Sarah looked ahead, they knew that their battle might have ended, but the fight against the darkness was far from over.